You want to keep the temperature of your meat products above 140 for serving temperature. So it's best to serve your hot food when it's hot outside like it is now within an hour. If it's a little bit cooler, within 2 hours, whatever you have left, put it in the refrigerator so you can use it later. The other thing to remember is as you're taking the meat off the grill, use a clean plate and clean utensils so you're not cross-contaminating anything. Just simple little things like that can really prevent a whole lot of problems from happening.
Warmer weather provides an opportunity to move much of our meal preparation outdoors. Kansas State University food scientist Karen Blakeslee says food safety needs to be a priority, especially when grilling food outdoors and hosting large outdoor parties. On today's Sound Living, summer food safety tips. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Blakeslee says the first rule for food safety, regardless of the season, is washing your hands, followed closely by using a food thermometer to check for proper doneness. Karen, I think it's probably safe to say we are either nearing or in the grilling season, and there's a lot of safety concerns that come with this from a food safety standpoint because we're dealing with a lot of meat, and that is stuff that needs to be cooked to a certain temperature.
That is correct. Yes, grilling season is probably in high gear based on the weather that's been happening here lately. And then all kinds of graduations happening. So, yes, food safety needs to be a part of your grilling activities because we're handling raw meat. And to start with, wash your hands. That's the number one thing before you start handling any food, and then especially after you've handled any kind of raw meat. Always wash your hands. Keep your meat cold until you're ready to use it. If you want to let it warm up a little bit, maybe 30 minutes or so, that's fine. But please refrain from letting it sit out for hours. That's really inviting any kind of bacteria that could be on the meat to start growing. And grilling and cooking it, you don't have that guarantee that the cooking process will take care of killing all of the bacteria that could be there. So be smart about that. Keep your meat cold up until you're ready to start doing the grilling. When you do grill your meats, there's 3 temperatures to remember. 145 degrees Fahrenheit is for steaks, roasts, chops, fish, things like that, the whole cuts of meat. For ground meat, I'm talking like ground beef, ground pork, ground lamb, you want to reach an internal temperature of 160. And then for any kind of poultry, no matter if it's a whole chicken or chicken breasts or chicken legs, we're looking for a temperature of 165. And so when you take the temperature of these things, of course, there's a variety of thermometers out there. So it kind of depends on the type of thermometer you have. But most of your digital thermometers are going to be instant read, which means the sensor, the temperature sensor, is in the tip of the thermometer. So you can insert it from the top if you wanted to with those. But the ideal way to do it, like on a hamburger, is to insert it from the side. And that way you reach the center of the product. If you have a dial gauge thermometer, it's got a little dial on it. If you look on the stem, there should be a little dimple on there. And that's where the sensor is. So you want to make sure you insert that type of thermometer all the way so that that little dimple gets into the meat product. But just remember those 3 temperatures. It keeps it simple. 145 for whole cuts, 160 for ground meat, and then 165 for any kind of poultry.
Yeah, and the people who think that their thumb knows best or their finger knows best, those are the people you got to watch out for. If you're at a barbecue and they're just kind of touching it thinking, oh, they're done.
It's very subjective, very subjective. So really your best tool is using a food thermometer.
In terms of people who are using smokers now, I think the temperature range is a little bit different for those. We still need to really make sure that we're staying within a certain temperature for these.
Smoking process is low and slow. So you still want to make sure that your meat temperature is still reaching that proper temperature of those 3 that I just mentioned. But how it reaches that is done a little bit slower because smoking products, you're typically using meat cuts that are tougher and it takes longer. That low and slow cooking process is what's needed for those types of cuts. such as a brisket, for example. So those types of meat, you still want to check the temperature of them. Make sure it does reach, in that case, like on a brisket, you want to reach at least 145. And the other thing to remember that when you've checked your temperature and maybe it's not quite reached that 145, for example, you can take it out. The meat, when you let it rest, it will still rise a little bit. And so you still have, I call it a buffer zone, to allow that temperature to reach where it needs to be. The other thing, too, is a lot of this with these temperatures, it really can help with the quality of the product in the end, so you're not overcooking it, too. You don't want to end up with tough rubber, in the end. So it can help prevent you from overcooking the meat, but obviously we don't want to undercook it either.
Yeah, you kind of bring up something I've always wondered about. Are there better meats for grilling in terms of like steaks and things like that? Or does quality matter if we're going to do the grilling? Because it seems like when you get a steak in a restaurant, it's always tender, it cuts real easily, and then you do it at home and it's like, why is my ribeye so much worse?
Yeah, I mean, it could depend on the quality. Sometimes it depends on the breed, where the meat comes from. Now, when you buy it from the grocery store, you don't know what breed that is. But typically for grilling, the types of meat cuts that you want to look for are those that will cook quickly, such as a steak, such as a pork chop, your ground meat type products, because it's a fast process that you're typically doing the grilling part. The smoking process goes low and slow, so you can use cuts that are a little bit tougher, such as the brisket, that take that longer time to cook. Steaks, when you use those, look for marbling. Marbling really does help with the juiciness and the tenderness of it, and the flavor is in the fat. You still want to try to use somewhat lean cuts for your nutrition benefits, but a little bit of fat does help because it does help with the flavor and the tenderness and the juiciness.
Are there some things that we can add to it that also might help to tenderize it a little bit?
A lot of people like to marinade, put their steaks or their chops in a marinade first. Those can help tenderize mainly the outside. It kind of depends on how long you marinate them, but really most of the time the marinade doesn't go all the way through. So you're really only hitting the outside surface of the meat cut on that. But those marinades can help a little bit, also adds flavor. And just a reminder, if you do use a marinade, any leftover marinade that you have, either discard it, or if you do want to use it, boil it first before you use it on your already cooked meat, because, it's soaked. You've got raw meat soaked in a marinade, so you don't want to have those raw juices on a freshly cooked steak or anything like that.
And we leave that marinade on the meat in the refrigerator. We don't leave it on the counter.
Exactly. Yeah, it's best to marinate in the refrigerator, 6 to 24 hours. Kind of depends on your time frame. Any longer than that, sometimes that can make the meat kind of mushy. You don't want to go too long in some cases because that can be detrimental to the texture of the product.
You kind of mentioned earlier some of the celebrations that may be coming up and some of the celebrations we'll have throughout the summer. If you're doing something on a larger scale and you're buying a lot of meat, do we need to make sure that we're buying it at the right time? Because I'm thinking just a couple of days in the refrigerator is kind of what they recommend if it's not frozen.
Right. Yeah. You want to try to purchase your meat product, as close to your event as possible. A couple days is fine. But if you're planning ahead, obviously you're going to need to freeze it. If you're buying meat now for July 4th, you're going to have to freeze it in order to save it for later use. If you do use frozen meat, thaw it in the refrigerator. That is best. We do not recommend that you thaw your meat on the countertop because the warm temperatures can wake up any bacteria that's there and allow it to grow. So it's best to throw it in a refrigerator. Plan ahead for that. Depends on the size of your meat product, how long that's going to take. A steak or something like that may only take 24 hours. But if it's a roast or a big brisket or something like that, then that's going to take 3 or 4 days. So plan ahead to be mindful of that and use good, safe thawing practices so that you don't invite any bacteria to grow.
A whole chicken, would this be something that you could do on a grill, or is this something that maybe needs a smoker?
It could go either way. With a whole chicken, you definitely want this to be thawed out first if it's frozen. But with a whole chicken, it might be easier to split it down the middle and cut it in half and then grill it that way. It would be easier and faster to get it done. Smoking would be a better option for a whole bird. That way it cooks a little more evenly. So, yeah, if you're doing a whole chicken, I would split it up or cut it into parts to grill it. That way it goes faster.
Once we take it off the grill, then we need to make sure that it is resting for about 3 minutes or so. But then after that, we really want to start serving, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's still hot. You want to serve it hot. You want to keep the temperature of your meat products above 140 for serving temperature. So it's best to serve your hot food when it's hot outside like it is now within an hour. If it's, a little bit cooler within 2 hours, whatever you have left, put it in the refrigerator so you can use it later. The other thing to remember is as you're taking the meat off the grill, use a clean plate and clean utensils so you're not cross-contaminating anything. Just simple little things like that can really prevent a whole lot of problems from happening.
We always want to keep the hot foods hot, the cold foods cold. That's kind of really where the side dishes come in.
Exactly. Yeah, the cold foods are usually your side dishes. Keep them cold. If you can keep them in the refrigerator until you're ready to serve them, that's best. Obviously, ice chests are very handy, so have a couple of them. Split up your foods, have the drinks in one ice chest and your refrigerated foods in another, just to keep things separated like that. And don't be afraid of potato salad and mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is not the problem. Mayonnaise is very acidic, and so mayonnaise really gets kind of a bad reputation. It's really what you mix into that mayonnaise. That's the problem. So with potato salad, you got cooked potatoes. You typically have hard-boiled eggs, things like that. Those are the problems. Those are the things that truly do need the refrigeration, and the mayonnaise is just going along for the ride. So give that mayonnaise a break. It's how you handle the rest of the food that really matters.
Deviled eggs fall into that same category?
Absolutely, yes. Those need to be cold, too.
Are there some things that we should think about in terms of storing the food that's left over? Because it seems like there's always a lot of leftovers. Yeah,
if you have any big quantities left over, divide them up. Put them into smaller containers. That way they chill faster in your refrigerator. Used to be people would say, I need to leave it set on the counter so it cools off. Today's refrigerators are very efficient, and you do not need to do that. So divide up your leftovers, put them into shallow containers, roughly about 2 inches tall, and then put them in your refrigerator when you're done eating.
Most of those, if you eat within a few days, you're good. If not, you can transfer it from the refrigerator to the freezer?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that can be frozen and saved for later use. The rule of thumb is to use your leftovers within about 3 or 4 days. Otherwise, get them into the freezer so you don't waste the food. That's the other part of this. We all need to work better at reducing food waste. One way to do that is managing leftovers. These little things like this can add up in the long run. So be mindful of that. Leftovers are great. It makes an easy lunch or a quick supper, or you can repurpose leftovers into a completely different meal. So be smart about that and do your part to help reduce some food waste.
Yeah, and with the sticker shock we're seeing at the grocery stores right now, definitely don't waste food.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're all feeling that. And so be smart about how much you're buying and then how you're using it and how you want to store your leftovers in the end. So be smart about your food.
And you have a lot of publications on all of this.
Yeah, several places to look. For the food safety resources, we have a Extension Food Safety website, which is www.ksre.ksu.edu/food safety.
That's Kansas State University food scientist Karen Blakeslee. Again, for more information, visit ksre.ksu.edu/food safety. As coordinator of Kansas State University's Rapid Response Center, Karen also publishes a monthly newsletter filled with food safety and food-related information. You can find that at rrc.ksu.edu. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.